You know what a cause beer is, Taplines listener? No? Maybe I made this term up? I don't know. But I bet you grasp the general idea. It's a beer brewed to raise money or awareness for a cause. Pairing beer with philanthropy isn't new. Macrobrewers partner with charities all the time, and craft breweries have collaborated with community organizations at a grassroots level since way back when they were still called microbreweries. But last decade, as craft beer boomed, the premise became a lot more popular and a lot more literal. Projects like Sierra Nevada's Resilience IPA, an open-sourced India Pale Ale recipe that more than 1,400 breweries around the country brewed to raise funds for wildfire relief in 2018, harnessed the collective power of the craft brewing industry for good. That particular campaign may well have been the culmination of the cause beer, or the zenith. But then 2020 happened. In the early months of the pandemic, Marcus Baskerville was working as the head brewer at Weathered Souls Brewing Company, the brewery he co-founded in San Antonio, when a police officer 5 states away murdered George Floyd. Marcus, who would go on to become a founding member of the National Black Brewers Association, an organization whose recent foundation you can hear more about in our episode with Executive Director Kevin Asado, by the way, go back and check that one out, had an idea to galvanize the industry and raise money for police brutality reform. What emerged was Black is Beautiful, a stout recipe that he posted online for anyone in the country to brew for the cause. The beer would go on to be brewed by more than 1,600 breweries across the country and 22 countries around the world, raise millions of dollars for charity, and provide a blueprint for cause beers to come. Today, Marcus Baskerville joins us to talk about all that and more. It's Marcus Baskerville. It's Black is Beautiful Stout. It's when cause beers went big. And it's all right here, right now on Five Pairs Taplines. Marcus Baskerville, welcome to the Taplines podcast, man.
Oh, thank you for having me. How's your day going?
It's going all right. It's better now that you're joining me here in the Taplines virtual studio, man. Where are you joining us from?
I am at home currently. I received a phone call a little earlier that my 4-year-old had a fever, so I had to bring her home and come take that for the day.
Well, we appreciate you putting dad duties on hold momentarily to talk beer with us, especially on a sick day, man. That's no fun. But if you have to step away from the microphone, I'm sure we can edit that in post. Yeah. Don't you worry about that. But Marcus, thanks so much for joining today. Listeners, surely many are aware of your work in the craft brewing industry, of the Black is Beautiful project that you implemented and spearheaded and helped grow into a tremendous collaboration beer / movement. We're going to talk about all of that today, but before we do, Marcus, give us, for listeners who aren't familiar, the quick, the headline on who you are, what Weathered Souls is, and what Black is Beautiful is.
So Marcus Baskerville, San Antonio, Texas. Brewery's been open for 7 years. Weathered Souls Brewing Company. We were one of the first, we'll say, 7 or 8 breweries that kind of opened in the San Antonio area back in 2016. Obviously, for San Antonio at the time, it wasn't a very heavily craft-centric scene.
Yeah.
I grew up in California, actually. Got into beer a little early on in my 20s through my brother and a relative who drank. But one of the commonalities very early on in beer where we discovered there wasn't a lot of people that looked like us that would visit tap rooms, or we would be the only ones. So my brother and me were always talking about starting to brew, that type of thing. And my brother got a Mr. Beer kit for Christmas. Ended up brewing it.
It's where it always starts, right?
Yeah, it came out horrible. And so I was like, I could brew a better beer than you. And we actually brewed our first couple of beers together. And then I had the opportunity to move to Texas, and kind of took home brewing a little more seriously since I really didn't have anything going on out here besides work. From there, I had got like a small little.
When was that, Marcus? Approximately when are we talking about?
So this is 11 years ago.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, like 2013.
Yeah, gotcha. So you moved to Texas 2012, 2013-ish, and you're getting a little bit more serious. And sorry to interrupt. You pick up the story back from there. Got it.
Yeah, so started bringing my beer around town and that type of thing, and letting people try the product that I was making, and kind of grew like a little local following for the beers that we were producing, I was producing at the time. And so this local bar let me do a tap takeover, and I had 5 beers on tap, and all 5 beers ended up tapping out in like 2 hours.
Cool. As a home brewer, that's no mean feat, man. Yeah.
So, local brewery ended up letting me do the same thing, and pretty much the same thing happened. Beers tapped out fairly swiftly. So they ended up offering me a job. I worked part-time at the brewery and then still full-time in my management position at Citibank at the time. And pretty much learned the do's and don'ts of the local scene. Ended up meeting my business partner Mike through the brewery. He was actually invested in the previous brewery that I was working for.
Mm-hmm.
And we used to go out and drink and that type of thing. And one time we were out, and I said, "Mike, when are we about to open a brewery?" And he was like, "I've been waiting for you to ask me that." And we started working on the business plan a couple weeks later. And opened up about, I think 8 months after that.
Yeah.
So Weather Souls, obviously what we specialize in, what I have a passion for anyway, are stouts. We do things across the board. We make some pretty good lagers, a couple of IPAs, getting into a lot of different styles, but where we excel are the manipulation of ingredients and stouts and other beers that can utilize additional treatments to, mimic certain things.
Yeah.
And so pretty much that's where we originally got most of our following, was for the stouts we were producing, barrel-aged stouts we were producing. We have a membership program with about 150 members that are fantastic advocates for us and trade our beer and, that type of thing. But Black is Beautiful. So 2020, at the height of the civil unrest of what was going on kind of across the country, I was in a place of like remorse. Like, I'm not going out to protest. We're in peak COVID season. And I just thought about my children. Actually, I have a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old. But at the time, because of where we were at mentally, I was like, what would my kids think about me if things were to get worse from where we were at? What was I doing at this time to give back? What was I doing at this time to support the Black community? And really, at that time, I could say nothing. I've always been an advocate for more minorities in beer, and that's a whole separate thing outside of Black is Beautiful, right? That's not what Black is Beautiful was about. But dealing with the overall just Black community itself, that's kind of where the support more so lied, was, the focus of my small window of what I'm into, right? My career. And so with Black is Beautiful, it was like, okay, I'm not really doing anything. Where will my kids look at me in this situation, 10, 15 years from now? I want to be impactful for them, want to make a difference for them, but then also want to show them, they should always want more for themselves and for their community and family and things like that. And so I was actually having a conversation with Jeffrey Stuffings. That's a really good friend of mine. Actually be meeting up with him later to go to the Spurs game. But was having a conversation with Jeffrey Stuffings from Jester King, and we were having a conversation about Trump relations, families, all that type of stuff. And I had told him what my idea was, and I was at the time thinking about doing a beer and then, be very local and then donate some beer locally or money locally, to support, one of the local organizations. And Jeff was like, I would understand if you don't want to, but you should turn this into a collaboration. And I was like, you know what, Jeff, you're right. And then I thought about it and spent the weekend figuring out how I could present a collaboration called Black is Beautiful to a 99.9% Caucasian industry without offending anybody or,
Yeah.
that type of thing.
Did you, Marcus, did you have any reluctant, you described that Jeff sort of floated this idea, hey, this should be a collaboration, don't just donate some beer, but, let's make this bigger. You should think about making this bigger. What were you thinking about when he said that? Was there reluctance on your part? Were you nervous about putting yourself out there? What was your initial reaction?
I literally told him, I was like, you're right. And I started working on that plan that night.
Really? Okay. So
Black is Beautiful came into fruition within 48 hours.
Wow. Okay.
Conversation was Saturday. I presented the plan to my team Monday morning at our Monday meeting. I actually sent it to my brother and one of our good family friends that Sunday night, just to kind of get, another opinion at the time. But yeah, I mean, it was a very short window of fruition and then creation of Black is Beautiful. It literally happened within 48 hours.
So this made sense to you right off the rip when your friend over at Jester King, Jeffrey, mentioned this. It's like, okay, cool. This definitely makes sense. What was your exposure to collaboration beers? Because this concept has existed, right? And you've seen it. We've seen it before for natural disasters. We've seen Pink Boots do collaboration beers. What was your exposure as a brewer, as a drinker, to that premise before, if at all?
As far as the mass production of the collaborations, I was very familiar with Sierra Nevada's efforts.
Right.
But outside of that, I mean, we're a collaborating brewery. I mean, I've had the luxury of collaborating with some of the best breweries across the country, breweries in the world. So dealing with that, we were already very familiar with the source of collaboration culture. But that was also one of the benefits that kind of led to some of the swift actions of Black is Beautiful and some of the partners and individuals that joined in. So, I got to have a fantastic, and then obviously was familiar with Sam and Other Halves collaboration, the All Together. So dealing with that, I had the luxury of having a conversation with Sam, I think day 2 of Black is Beautiful. And he pretty much gave me everything that he learned from the All Together project, the do's and don'ts. But then he also challenged me because originally with Black is Beautiful, we just asked for a portion of proceeds. And Sam was the one that was like, you know what? This collaboration is way too important and you should tell people they should donate 100%. And so having those conversations with him and a couple of other of the initial partners gave a lot of drive to the direction of Black is Beautiful and the way we were going to do things. So then even having Craft Peak come along and set up the website and, be able to host it for me and different things like that. We were obviously in a place of early success because of the partners we were able to bring on based off of some of the collaborations and conversations that I've already had with people. Yeah.
Were you nervous about asking for 100% of proceeds? I mean, that is a big ask in some contexts,
at first
right?
I was like, oh man. Yeah, I was like, oh man, I don't know if I want to do that. Like, I want people to participate. But at the end of the day, like I understood the assignment, right? It was way too important. And that was one of the big drivers upon getting some of the partners that we had as far as, donation of grain, labels, hops, yeast, and everything else that was involved with the production of the beer. And so those large discounts, donations, and things like that really drove people to being able to help at that time.
Yeah. For listeners who aren't familiar with it, or maybe they weren't into craft beer at the time, or maybe they were too busy sanitizing their groceries during the early days of COVID, and didn't catch this when it first emerged. Can you describe just sort of in brief the mechanics of Black is Beautiful as a collaboration beer? Like how does it work? I mean, a lot of our listeners are in the trade, but many aren't. So how does this sort of thing actually go down?
Yeah, so Black is Beautiful is a collaboration amongst, thousands of breweries to participate in brewing a stout recipe that was created at Weathered Souls Brewing Company.
Mm-hmm.
They would produce that stout and then donate 100% of those proceeds to organizations, charities, foundations that support social justice reform, police brutality reform in their local communities.
Mm-hmm.
So far, Black is Beautiful has had about 1,700 different breweries participate. It's raised almost $5 million in support of those initiatives and things like that. But then it's also been a catalyst to a lot of fantastic things that have happened in the industry over the last 3 to almost 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
The BA becoming more serious about their DEI efforts. There was a large focus on Black brands, Black um, content creators. There was a lot of donations to Black breweries that were able to operate and build their contracts and different things like that. But then even then getting to some of those social justice initiatives and things like that, a lot of organizations at that time, especially in COVID time, benefited from it. I actually did a fireside chat for NPR last year, and one of the people that I was talking with that was part of the panel, she was a recipient of Black is Beautiful, and she was just telling me how much it assisted her in her restaurant at the time. And some of her
Cool.
initiative efforts that she participates in with the James Beard Foundation and things like that.
Mm.
And so dealing with that, Black is Beautiful transcended way beyond what I thought it was going to do. I originally told my business partner, I was like, oh, we'll probably have like 200 people maybe participate or something like that.
Yeah.
And in day one, it had reached over, I think it was like 380. Then the second day, it was 500-600.
Yeah.
That type of thing.
What was let's go back to sort of so you said it took about 48 hours to come together. You present to the team, the site goes live. Give us the early days. What does it look like? Are you guys doing outbound promotion? Are you're hitting up maybe all of your former collaborative partners to say, hey, we're doing this. We'd love to have you on board. Tell us what the early steps look like. You remember?
It was hell. It was hectic. It was actually for like a couple of months. It was like not seeing the light of day.
Wow.
It was actually the support. Actually, my sales manager, Kimberly, was a huge support at that time. She is basically my number two at Black is Beautiful, assisting in a lot of emails and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Basically being my assistant, per se, which was definitely not her job. But that early on stage, no, I actually didn't reach out to that many breweries. I think I reached out to like 5 or 6 friends and was like, hey, be on the lookout for this. I'm doing this.
Yeah.
But I really didn't like blast it to anybody. That was the beautiful thing about Black is Beautiful. Everything was organic. I didn't even send a press release out until I think 6 months in. And
Wow.
by then it was already, out there. And so dealing with getting that whole thing situated, I give that a testament to one, the breweries that participated, but then two, obviously the consumers, because we don't pay for marketing or anything like that.
Yeah.
And it was literally the sharing and the cheering and ownership of what people took behind the initiative that really actually drove it.
Mm. At what point did you realize that, like, oh man, this is a thing? Like, this is actually going to take off. This thing has legs on its own.
Like day 4, day 5.
Yeah. Do you remember approximately?
It's funny because Sam goes in our initial conversation. He was like, "Are you ready to?" He asked me this question. He was like, "Are you ready to be the face of like Black brewers everywhere?"
Mm.
And in my head, I'm like, Sam, what the hell are you talking about? Like, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's not. And yeah, that's, essentially what occurred. So, it became one of those things where, you're very grateful for the thing blowing up the way that it did because it helped and supported so many people. But it took so much consumption of my life that I was not prepared for.
Wow. let's talk about that a little bit, because this is, I feel like, if not pivotal to the story, certainly an important part of it, right? Is that, like, 2020, the murder of George Floyd puts everyone in the streets, or many people in the streets across the country, big cities, small towns. There's a lot of conversation in mainstream American discourse in a way that there really hasn't been in my lifetime. Certainly, I'm 35. Like, this is the first time it seems like, the mainstream discourse will grapple with these
Rodney King.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I was 4 years old, right? And even then, without the internet, people were watching that on CNN with all its many woes.
Exactly.
So there's also, this is the first time I think a lot of people are coming to grapple with the idea that, like, okay, social justice activism is, a form of labor. This stuff is exhausting. People are putting their bodies on the line, putting certainly like hours and hours and years of their lives into working towards these goals. There's a fatigue that comes with that, I think this was another thing that people sort of start to be apprised of. Activists, of course, have always been aware of this, but more generalist, the everyday rank and file American who isn't tapped into, the struggle, the movement, such as it is, maybe doesn't realize this. And 2020 is the first time there's some conversation about, like, yeah, this shit actually, like, takes a lot of work, and, like, the people at the center of it, particularly Black people in the case of 2020, which was oriented around George Floyd's murder, like, there's a fatigue level there. It sounds like to some extent you touched some of that with this project as it starts taking off. I mean, tell us a little bit about, there's a tension there, right? Because on one hand, you're thrilled it's taken off, but on the other, you only got so many hours in the day, man.
Yeah. The thing about Black is Beautiful is it took me away from my everyday, like, responsibilities of work, right? Especially in also being a father. I mean, like I said, I got 2 kids.
And they were even younger then than they are now. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And so I'm spending a majority of my time doing interviews, podcasts, at that point working with partners, getting ingredients and things set up for people, and hundreds of other things. And so it was one of those things where even my wife had to, like, create boundaries. All right, you get into bed at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. You're not allowed to be on your phone anymore. But 10:30 at night, I'm still receiving emails,
right,
or, requests for interviews or whatever the case may be. And you don't want to miss those opportunities because you want to drive the initiative because it has so much momentum, and, the emotional response is what created it to be successful. And so you also are on the form of, you don't want to let everybody else down because you've created this thing that is driving a momentum, and it's actually helping people and providing financial support and, resources, finances, or all those things that we've talked about that we've never had.
Yeah.
And so, you want to be able to support those things.
There's a strike while the iron's hot.
Yeah,
sort of dynamic,
exactly.
Right?
It's that's the mentality. You gotta work it while you can, because things are very short lived, especially in our generation of how things are.
Sure.
And so, that was the focus at the time, but it definitely, put strain on my families, my relationships. It put strain at work,
sure,
because people had to step up in other places that they may have not been ready for, that I was responsible for before that. But because we're trying to drive success to Black is Beautiful, and even getting into distribution and things like that at that time, it took me away from the everyday focus.
Yeah.
And so it was also definitely a mental place, because it drove to other things for me to be involved in. I ended up getting on the board of directors for the Brewers Association. I actually created and launched the DEI organization for the Texas Craft Brewers Guild. We just launched the National Black Brewers Association last May, which I'm now the president of that organization. And so it definitely drove me into a lot of different areas of focus, a lot of different areas of work, but it's all things that you look forward to because it's developing and growing and helping the things that you've been cheerleading for so long. But then on the other end of it, I had to reevaluate some of the things that were going on personally, because I mean, even the amount of work that I am involved in, the amount of travel that I'm involved in, like,
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, like me and my wife separated for a short time
Oh,
because it
wow.
was the strain and stress on her of dealing with the kids. And, I'm not emotionally there or physically there or
Yeah.
emotionally involved with her because my focus is work and trying to build this brand and trying to build Black is Beautiful while also trying to build Weathered Souls while also trying to be an advocate for Black brewers everywhere.
Yeah.
And so it definitely caused a lot of strain and stress in my life.
That is a
But,
lot.
but, those are the things that you take on when you're taking on so much and, you're drove into this success in literally like 4 or 5 days.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell us about the relationship between Weathered Souls and Black is Beautiful in those early days. I mean, as you mentioned, this is all happening against the backdrop of COVID. Even prior to George Floyd's murder, the country has started to lock down. Breweries, of course, there's, depending on where you are in the marketplace, there's maybe an opportunity because packaged beer is going bananas as everyone goes to stock up at the supermarket. But on the flip side, tap rooms are totally or almost totally shut down. So this is not exactly a moment when Weathered Souls could have been on autopilot either. This is a very difficult moment for brewers generally, whether or not they're trying to launch a collaboration beer, that is as tied to the zeitgeist or as tied to the American moment as Black is Beautiful was and is. What's the relationship look like in those early days between the Black is Beautiful brand and the Weathered Souls brand?
Yeah, it was tough because going into 2019, 2020, we actually had a lot of momentum at that point. Like I said, we were doing a lot of collaborations at that point. We were becoming very popular for some of the stouts that we were producing, things like that. So we were actually building up our distribution channel at that time. Then COVID happened. I remember COVID. I was in Vegas at a beer festival at Beer Zombies, and then all the information on the news about people getting sick and entering the U.S. And I'm literally flying back to San Antonio at that time, and then like a week later, the shutdowns and all that type of stuff started to happen. And then even then, you're nervous, like, oh my God, did I catch it while I was out? Like, that type of stuff.
And no one knew if it was airborne. No one knew if it was contact.
Exactly.
Sure. Those early days were crazy.
We were very serious about it. Like, I didn't let anybody in my house all the way from February of 2020 to December of 2020.
Wow.
If anybody came to the house, you had to be on the porch and masked up, and I had hand sanitizer when you came to the house, and that type of thing. Like, we took it very seriously. But dealing with the brewery in itself, it was hard, especially for Texas, because all of the shutdowns. And then if you don't have this type of license, then you're going to need this license to be able to operate. Then, the beer to go type of thing. And then it was like, all right, people can open for a little bit. And then 2 weeks later, all right, you have to shut down again.
Yeah.
So we went through those experiences here in Texas, which made it really difficult. Black is Beautiful was actually one of those saving graces because, again, it was one of those emotional responses. So even our local customers just started driving to the brewery itself just to support. Because, obviously dealing with the amount that we donated from Black is Beautiful, we didn't make any money on that, obviously.
Yeah.
And it's always funny, like, they distributed this for Black is Beautiful and did this, and they made this amount of money, and, you hear that, and it's like, no, like, there wasn't any Black is Beautiful money for us anyway. Everything got donated. But driving into that, it did build some local support. But then on the other end of it, because, it's one of those things, again, Black is Beautiful, and it's supporting. You also have seen the other side of it where we lost some support. And I think there's certain customers that still haven't came back to this day because we did that particular initiative.
Really?
And yeah, I mean, it was crazy. Like, even like we had so much support. Like the amount of positivity that arose from Black is Beautiful was amazing. But it got to the point I was receiving letters in the mail. I were getting, threatening emails. Like it was to the point like started telling like my staff, like, if it's an envelope of mail and it's not like from a place of business that we're fully aware of, like, don't even give it to me. Because it was like seriously, like just hate mail and different things like that we were getting based off the initiative too.
Wow.
And so it was definitely an interesting experience in that front. But like I said, the positivity wise, because I also got letters just on the positive aspects and thank you, and donations in the mail and different things like that. But it was wild. But I think the overall support was way more than the negative aspects of what we received.
Good.
Yeah.
Man, getting hate mail in the mail is like
it was like the 1990s, like,
right?
Somebody took the time to write out a letter.
You gotta go get a stamp.
Take it to the post office. Yeah, like, who does that?
That's a lot of hate in your heart. If you're still mailing hate mail, I mean, good golly, fire up a Gmail account or something, man. Save yourself the energy. That's intense, man. Of course, I've get a fair amount of hate mail for my work over the years, but it's always email. It's never in the mail. And it's also, the stakes are much lower. It's usually a craft brewer that's mad at me for something that's like very insular and only matters in this community. It's not framed against like the race relations of the country writ large, and someone's racist take on that. I can imagine that was pretty corrosive for you to have to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. But like I said, I think the positivity of it definitely outweighed the negative.
Yeah.
We received a lot more championing praise than anything. But yeah.
So a couple years, oh gosh, it is like almost a couple years ago. In 2022, my colleague and friend Kate Bernat did a story.
I'm very familiar with Kate.
Yeah.
She's a lovely person.
Kate's great. We love Kate here on the podcast. Hopefully eventually we get her, we find some excuse to bring her on and chat with her. But she spoke to you, kind of looking at, 2 years in, this is what Black is Beautiful has done, gave sort of the overview. And you had this quote when you were speaking to you said, here's a quote, excuse me, you did this amazing thing and you don't want it to dwindle. You don't want it to die down. You want the momentum to stay. That's why we're working on these next steps. So that's close quote. So let's talk a little bit about, first of all, what you're getting at there. This idea between like, you kind of, sometimes you hear people talk about like a moment versus a movement type of thing. Like, tell us about the big, splashy, exciting, first few months for Black is Beautiful, and then what that sort of morphs into as maybe the initial excitement fades and maybe there aren't necessarily as many press requests or whatever. What takes the place of that initial sort of explosive energy for Black is Beautiful?
Yeah, so when it initially started in those first few months, you're driven, you have that momentum, right? It's just the adrenaline that you have based off of the excitement of everybody else. So, I got to do an interview with Gail King and,
cool.
Got to run through steps initially with Kelly Clarkson, but then COVID messed that up. Like, we filmed a commercial with Indeed. All of these fun things happen that keep your adrenaline going and keep you working towards the goal. But then even then, you start, again, receiving the positivity aspects of what was happening at that time, right? I received numerous emails, letters, things that showed the impact of what Black is Beautiful was doing, who it was helping and how it was helping people. And, you see the impact online and social media, and it keeps driving you to want to be successful within that front because it's helping so many people. But then again, you run through the fatigue aspect. And then you're like wishing like, hey, I need this to kind of be over a little bit. I need to get back to my normal life and, family and those type of things. But then, that situation happens. And then you run through the phase of, wow, people aren't contacting you as much. It's not moving as much at this point. It was a movement for like almost a year and a half, and people were driven, but then now the people aren't donating as much. Not as many people are joining as swiftly. You're not getting that many media requests and things like that.
Yeah.
And I was actually on a Peloton ride. And I was listening to Tunde, and Tunde talked about passion and purpose and passion, and how your passion isn't always your purpose and your purpose isn't always your passion. And it motivated me in a sense, because it made me realize that social justice work, social justice efforts, raising money, being the face of Black brewers everywhere, driving success for other people weren't at the initial thought of what my purpose is in life, right? That's not my passion. My passion is brewing beer and being with my family and just being myself. Like, I'm a huge introvert. Like, I don't even like talking to people on the every day.
Sorry to make you come on a podcast.
No, you're fine. Like, I'm just being honest. Like, for instance, I just did a conference this week at Dogfish Head in Delaware.
Yeah.
And I was having a conversation with one of the other board members of the NB2A. And, we're getting on the plane, and I was like, man, I'm about to sleep this whole flight. And I was telling him, like, you do it because it's helping, right? You do it because this is making a difference, but it's so draining. And you have to go through those recharge phases. You have to go through those points of being able to have that alone time to be able to recharge and regroup and just have your own mental thought processes. But you really can't, because you're working so much, you're advocating so much, and then the other time needs to go to your family.
Yep.
So there's really never any time for yourself.
Yeah.
But within that sense, you went through that. And so listening to passion and purpose, I realized that, it's not my passion to do social work. It's not my passion to drive, diversity in beer. My passion lies in producing beer. My passion lies in being in the industry. But what my purpose is realizing that I've put myself in this position to give back. I've put myself in a position to be able to access different relationship resources, capital, or whatever the case may be, that not the everyday person or that looks like me has been able to do. And so if I have to put in the effort, if I have to go ahead and do these things so the next person could be successful, so when my kids decide if she wants to be a brewer and take over, she doesn't run through the same struggles that I've had to go through, or the next person. That's the most important aspect of it. And so that's why I do it.
Yeah. Passion and purpose.
Shout out to Tunde. So shout out to Tunde from Peloton, because that conversation in itself really is what clicked for me. And so after that, we were in the process of opening our second location. And so a couple of years ago, I found out that I wasn't the only brewer in the family. And we have a cousin that brews, and he brewed professionally at one point in his careers. He doesn't anymore, but he used to work for 21st Amendment a long time ago.
Oh, no kidding.
And worked for, a couple other breweries back in the day. He's like originally one of the original members of the BN Army and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
But to find out, I never knew that my grandma, who's 97 years old, used to brew and distill during Prohibition.
What?
And she was always somebody that told us, "Oh, you don't need to drink, and you don't need to be messing with alcohol, and all of those things." But I never got the full story until after I opened the brewery. And I was having a conversation with her on the phone one day, and she broke down the whole story for me. And so she used to brew and distill in Prohibition with her dad. Her grandma used to brew and distill during slavery. But where she stopped was she was 13 years old, and somebody kept asking her for some of the like hooch that she was making, and she grew kind of spiteful that the person kept asking. So she gave him some of the concentrated liquid,
Oh, God.
and the man ended up falling off the roof.
Oh, gosh.
And so she prayed to the Lord above that the police wouldn't come and take this young black girl away in Topeka, Kansas. And the police never came. And so she kept her promise to the Lord and never had anything to do with alcohol ever again.
Wow, man.
To the point I didn't even get the story, until a few years ago.
I can't believe you didn't know that until you went and opened a brewery. What a crazy bit of family lore.
Right. And so, it very much runs in our history, our blood, that type of thing. But within that sense, I thought it was important to navigate and harvest the next generation. And so we ended up launching an incubation program in her name, the Harriet Baskerville Incubation Program. So we have some fantastic partners behind that, and RAR, BSG, Yakima Chief, who's been fantastic, White Labs, all these wonderful people within the industry to drive change within the industry that we currently have. And you look at, where minorities and women are in beer, you figure the majority are contract brewers because they don't have the resources, finances to open up brick and mortar locations. But one of the things that I always think about is how you drive real change. And we know, like, you can always produce more brewers. You can always produce people behind the tap room. You can always produce production men or whatever the case may be. But real change is created in the people that have the decision making and the ownership, which is something that I've been discovering in my career. I might have a small dose of ownership within Weathered Souls, and I might drive the brand as far as the creative aspect of the beer, but I don't make the decisions. And so in learning that, learn that that's the most important driver, right? Is when you make real change, or the individuals that can make those decisions, that have the ownership, that have control. And so that's what this particular incubation is driven on, is providing people with the means, one, of how to find financing, but then two, also how to manage your brewery, how to work with vendors, partners, how to actually own and operate a brewery. And so originally we were supposed to launch in the Charlotte location, but there's been some changes to that. So one of the things that I'm also working on is trying to acquire new investment for Weathered Souls, because one of the things that I'm trying to drive, obviously, is it becoming 100% Black owned, or majority Black owned, but then also gaining a partner that has foresight for breweries and restaurants, and kind of developing more of Weathered Souls into where it needs to continue on and drive for the purpose of what we're trying to do in the industry. So that's one of the current projects amongst all the other things that I'm kind of working on right now. And so obviously, it's going to be important to continue to drive revenue into Weathered Souls and make some changes. But, once that happens, then I can launch the incubation program in the San Antonio location, while also supporting the National Black Brewers Association and doing the things necessary to continue to make change in the industry. Like, one of the things I'm most proud about, actually, the BA just launched it about the new bylaw changes that are happening. So if you're a brewer that is listening, that is a BA member, make sure that you go vote for your bylaws, because obviously voting is very important. But one of the bylaw changes is now that contract brewers have voting rights. And so that was one of the main drivers when I got into the board of directors for the BA. And how I essentially put it to them was, this reminds me of the 1960s when you guys were trying to find reasons why Black people can't vote. Because you look at the majority of contract brewers, they're Black, minority, and women. And so now you're taking out complete demographics out of voting rights that can actually make changes within the BA because of why? Because they don't own a brick and mortar location, because they didn't have the means or resources to be able to get what they need. And so it was so dealing with that, I'm really happy that was one of the changes that happened. But those type of changes are the things that, I've been focused on in the industry and since Black is Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, expresses sort of what you were describing earlier, which is like the locus of power is in these industry shaping, decisions, right? Like it's not a matter of just chirping at people on social media or getting into it with someone at a conference or whatever. It's, there's and there are dueling schools of thought here, of course, changing stuff from within versus, critiquing it from outside, whatever. But there's a power structure there, and changing that power structure happens with like nitty gritty stuff, like voting for new bylaws.
Exactly.
It's got to happen, right? If there's going to be any change. You mentioned the National Black Brewers Association a few times now, Marcus, and listeners, if you haven't yet, we had a episode with NB2A Executive Director Kevin Asado earlier in Taplines feed. You can go back and check that one out. Marcus, NB2A is you're the president of NB2A, one of your many responsibilities. Talk a little bit about the relationship. I asked you before about the relationship between Black is Beautiful and Weathered Souls. Tell us about the relationship between Black is Beautiful and the National Black Brewers Association.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly feel that, the National Black Brewers Association is one of those catalysts of Black is Beautiful. Black is Beautiful raised a lot of concern and issues for our industry and where we were at the time. Again, there's over 10,000 breweries in the industry and less than 1% of them are Black owned. And again, I'm one of those individuals myself where I have very small ownership, but I don't control anything. I don't make the decisions. It's almost very much like a music industry, like 360 deal, right?
Right.
You can go ahead and you can create and, do all these things. But at the end of the day, like if you want those recipes or if you want the brand, you're going to have to pay, and so dealing with that type of realization within my career, again, the National Black Brewers Association is about building equity. There's obviously, again, even getting into contract brewers and not having voting rights within the BA. Again, the majority of contract brewers are Black. And so, again, you're taking out the right to vote, the right to make change within an entire organization and an entire demographics not able to do it based off of these original bylaws that are in there. And what's the reason for them not being able to vote? Because they don't have a brick and mortar location. They're still contributing to the overall barrelage. They're still contributing to the overall culture and everything else what craft beer is about. So why do these individuals not have voting rights? Because their daddy didn't give them $100,000 to open a brewery.
100,000.
So
I don't know, more than that. Yeah.
Well, we're getting into the old heads because remember the old heads are the ones that really control what the Brewers Association is about.
Sure.
So no, not 100,000, but they weren't spending that much money back then.
Yeah.
But dealing with that, it was important to create an organization that built equity, that built change, and that has a focus on minorities within beer. And so Kevin Johnson, the former mayor of Sacramento, had actually reached out to me. And it was funny because I was just telling the story at the National Black Brewers Association meeting this past week. And he originally texted me and was like, "Hey, this is Kevin Johnson. When you have time, I want to have a conversation with you." talk to you for a minute. And like, I look at my phone, and one, I'm like, Kevin Johnson. The only Kevin Johnson I know is the former mayor of Sacramento. He's not texting me. But then two, who done gave my number out without permission, right? And so like literally, so I didn't even respond. I didn't even say anything. And a couple weeks goes by, and then he messages me again. And I was like, all right, let me call and see what's going on. And he was like, when's the next time you're coming to Sacramento? Because I want to talk to you about this organization that I'm thinking about building. And my initial response was like, it sounds good, right? But then, there's just so much work to be involved to create an entire association. But then I told him certain people that I thought needed to be involved at that time.
Yeah.
So obviously Dr. J, of the Brewers Association,
Sure.
Crafted for Action,
Sure.
and Garrett Oliver, who is the epitome of what you see a Black person become within beer. Right, that man has accomplished so many things.
Sure.
It's crazy. Even to getting into Christopher Johnson of Green Bench out of St. Petersburg, and Tia Hunter of Crowns and Hops. But getting these individuals who are making changes within the industry already, or who have made changes, to go ahead and get together to build this organization. Obviously Celeste from Harlem Hops.
Sure, yeah.
Who's been in the game, since I was a wee child.
Yeah. Many years. Yeah.
Many years. So getting into that, building that organization around them. And so he went and did that and got every single one of them, plus more, involved in this. And what he did in the short year, getting this, him and Mr. Asado, Kevin Asado. He hates when I call him Mr. Asado. But I'm like, you're my elder. My parents taught me respect.
He probably hates that too when you say that.
But getting into that, just the overall success of what they've been able to do, raising capital, getting all of us together, building some of the membership qualities of what we're going to present and be within this industry. They've done a great job. And so I was just joking with Kevin, Mr. Johnson, the other day, like, man, you set me up for failure, because I have so much to follow up on, this year, based off of what they've been able to be successful in already.
Yeah.
But looking at this organization and the things that we're about to do, is going to be amazing. I mean, you look at what we've already been able to do for Celeste, for instance, where she was gifted an entire 10-barrel system, where Celeste has never been able to have a system, has been contract brewing for 15, 20 years.
Yeah, wow.
And so now she's going to be able to produce her own beer in her own location. And that was something the Black Brewers Association did. And so driving into exactly of what we've been talking about, building equity, building ownership, being able to give Black brewers their own, that's something that's very important to this organization and what's going to drive it to success. But then even also supporting even the smallest brewer, the smallest home brewer, the advocates that are within, Black beer. You don't have to be Black to join the National Black Brewers Association. It's an association that is going to build equity, but then also it's going to provide resources. It's going to do all of the things that the Brewers Association does over the course of time. But obviously it's still something that's new. We're still obviously looking for support, still looking for partners, still looking for people to join in and help us out. But within this short year, it's been able to do some amazing things already.
Yeah. We're now, almost 4 full years removed from the launch of Black is Beautiful. Because what month was it in 2020?
It launched June 1st.
Okay, so we're coming up on the 4-year anniversary. We've got, not maybe as much distance between this historical moment and the present as we do on some of our other episodes. But still, 4 major years have unfolded with COVID, with the presidential election, with another one coming up, whatever. So life is living hard these days, it seems, and 4 years is enough time, I think, and I hope, for you to maybe get an opportunity to have some distance from it, some remove from it, and reflect a little bit about like how it's gone versus maybe how you thought it would go versus what your hopes for the program were, or for the beer were, and everything that it spawned. How do you it sounded you're a thoughtful guy. We've talked at this idea in a couple different, from a couple different angles throughout our conversation, but where does Black is Beautiful fit into your life now versus how you expected it to when it started?
Well, it's definitely still going. We launched Volume 2 under the National Black Brewers Association. And so this past year was creating a hazy IPA recipe that I created. And so all of those proceeds go in support of the National Black Brewers Association, instead of choosing your own organization to donate to this time around. But that's obviously, if people can or have the capacity to brew the new recipe, those donations are going to help tremendously. So being said that, it's very much still a part of my everyday life in that sense that we still talk about Black is Beautiful. I'm still receiving questions and things like that, especially from home brewers or new breweries that are joining to brew the hazy. And so as far as I guess it has transitioned into other things, right? I can't really put Black is Beautiful in its own bubble because it has evolved me into multiple aspects of my everyday life that I do different things based off of what Black is Beautiful created. Again, getting into the National Black Brewers Association, I've been an advocate for Black and beer for a very long time. But seeing that organization launched, I don't think that would have happened if Black is Beautiful didn't happen. Getting to some of the other organizations that you see, some of the other initiatives that you see, breweries driving, even getting into some of the Me Too movement stuff, that wouldn't have happened if Black is Beautiful didn't happen. And so you get into, what it evolved into, it kind of branched out. And so I like to say I don't put Black is Beautiful in its own kind of bubble because it's transitioned into so many other things that are happening within the industry, that are evolving within the industry. Just like I don't think I would have been president of the National Black Brewers Association if I didn't create Black is Beautiful, right?
Yeah.
So even getting into that realization, but at the end of the day, it was something that is still ongoing and something that made so much change to this industry. I don't think that it's ever going to ever disappear in that sense, right? I mean, it's in the Smithsonian, it's in the Martin Luther King National Library. It has its legacy.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be one of those things that as long as there are minorities that are still fighting to grow the equity space within beer, it's still going to be something that's going to be talked about.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Marcus Baskerville, you've gone the distance here on Taplines. We appreciate your time very much, my friend. You're welcome back anytime. Thanks so much, man. That was I think I certainly enjoyed our conversation. I'm sure our listeners did.
Yeah, definitely.
Did too, man. Thanks so much for stopping by.
Yeah, thank you for having me again. It was fun.
Right on. Taplines is recorded in Richmond, Virginia, and produced by yours truly and Darby Seaside, who, along with the talented Shane Farrick, composed our delightful soundtrack. Just listen to it. I also want to give a quick shout out to the entire VinePair team, and especially co-founders Adam Teeter and Josh Mallon, editor-in-chief Joanna Sciarrino, managing editor Tim McCurdy, and art director Danielle Grinberg, who designed our lovely Taplines logo. And of course, a big thank you to you, yes you listener, for spending time with us week in and week out. We literally couldn't do this without you. I'm Dave Infante, and I'll catch you next time.